It's an honor to welcome you at the Budapest Global Dialogue on this December morning. And I want to introduce Violeta Bulc, former Commissioner for Transport at the European Union, at the European Commission. She's from Slovenia, and Professor Michael Reynolds from the Princeton University, from the Department of Near Eastern Studies. We are of the same generation. That means that we personally experienced huge transformation in historical proportions. Maybe the two of us more, but I'm sure that you have experienced also just transitioning from a pre-technology world to a technological world to a more integrated world, and then now that world is changing really. And you studied a lot also about empires, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire, and so on. One thing cannot be more geopolitical and had a more direct impact of countries, regions, and people's lives than energy. Whether it's regulation, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's pricing, sustainability, what we are talking about. They are hugely important matters that we experienced here in Central Europe, in the whole of the European Union, and we see all over the world. And obviously now we see a transformation in the global environment, and the chances are whether we can return to a more integrated energy market, or the fragmentation of what we see, or the multipolarity of the geopolitical environment is going to be a long lasting. I would really appreciate if you can talk about that. Maybe Michael from...
Sure. Well, first let me say it's wonderful to be back in Budapest. The first time I was here was in 1989. I'd studied Russian that summer in Moscow, and then came to do a little bit of tourism. And so my first thoughts are, yes, I've witnessed in my lifetime some pretty momentous changes. And thinking of energy, of course, one of the major causes of the collapse of the Soviet Union, not the main collapse I would say was the exhaustion of communist ideology, but there was an energy question which exacerbated the internal economic crisis in the Soviet Union, and that was the decline in oil prices in the 1980s. That sort of brought the lack of efficiency in the Soviet economy to the fore. That was no longer possible to simply export oil and earn dollars and other hard currency. And that had enabled the Soviet Union to keep going for a little bit longer. In thinking about reflecting then the changes that have taken place in energy since the end of the Cold War, so if energy played an important role in the end of the Cold War. In the immediate aftermath, I remember as an American, really, energy, like many things, was only thought of in terms of economics. That really, the key thing was simply the price, and oil in particular, natural gas as well, are seen really as these are economic resources. Lower prices means greater productivity. The way to get greater prices is to encourage more production. Et cetera. It was not seen, in other words, as a strategic resource, which it had been during the Cold War. Now, of course, we see that energy is very much understood, and then I speak again as an American, even in America, as primarily almost a strategic asset. And this is related to the war in Ukraine, where the United States, through the application of sanctions, has sought to cripple the Russian economy by limiting Russia's ability to sell oil and natural gas on world markets. And I think likewise, looking at American foreign policy, strategic planning in military terms, the importance of energy as not simply an economic asset, but as a weapon of coercion and an asset in times of conflict and war in particular, those have always been there. It's not that America's military leadership or even political leadership have forgotten those things, but they've come much more to the forefront today.
Violeta,
Yeah, I'd like to pick up where my colleague actually already opened the field. I believe that energy is one of the three core enablers of any kind of successful economy, besides raw materials and people, and lately maybe data are joining them. And that's why there is so many global conflicts over access to energy, distribution of energy, and it's always whoever masters the energy resources and knows how to distribute them well, that's the one who leads the world. And that's one of the primary reasons why EU already about 10, 15 years ago decided to put much more stress on the strategic reshaping of energy sector, seeking multilateral agreements and seeking different sources of energy in order to lower the dependence on one particular country. But not only that, EU also decided to move forward into much stronger renewable energy resource, because that is something that we have on our own. Like oil and gas are not really our strengths. And that can also be understood in the sense of how EU's foreign policy in this area has been delivered. However, right now in the current position, one of these goals has been seriously challenged. Again, even though we are shifting the focus of our energy sources, but we are not really delivering that much on the variety of resources. However, the good information and the good news is that the growth of our green energy is really growing nicely. And that is maybe a great proof that the distributed energy resources make sense. And I do believe that the future of energy market, if we want to use it as a tool for democracy and tools for finding the balance in the world, will have to be distributed, will have to be from variety of resources, and hopefully moving more and more towards renewable sources of energy, helping countries to identify their own sources of energy, identify how they can gain sovereignty over the energy resources, and really move it away from the political manipulation or malversation in order to have a bit more stable economy.
So we are talking about a world that is using more and more energy. So artificial intelligence, not to say, yes. So a new development. Up to now, it was that we need to use less energy. It should be sustainable. It should be green energy. Now, with the geopolitical fragmentation and the leap towards new technologies, we see that energy is really in a high demand. So a lot of things can happen. How you see, Michael, the geopolitical aspects of today's, like what's happening in Syria, with obviously would be happy if we could rely on green energy, on solar energy, wind energy, and so on. But fossil fuels are going to stay for a while here and determine the relationship among nations. I mean, we are in December here in Central Europe. If something happens on the front line in Ukraine and Russia, people are going to freeze over here. So it's a big issue.
Yes, I think to pick up on the point that Violetta made, which is that diversification of sources of energy is extremely important both for economic stability but also political stability. So I welcome, I think like most people, the advances in so-called green energy, precisely because it provides more diversification and therefore stability. On the other hand, though, as you said, fossil fuels are going to remain important for quite some time to come, and particularly oil and gas. And also, as you know, the demand for energy is only increasing. And as yes, I understand AI development of that extraordinary demand for electricity. Of course, that electricity has to be created somewhere. And another interesting phenomenon is also the cryptocurrencies. We don't know where they're going to go, but they're also quite energy. They consume a lot of energy. Something which a casual observer would not expect, because these are something that exists in the virtual world, and yet Bitcoin at least consumes a great deal of energy. So, and again, that energy, oil and gas, are going to be extremely important. And diversification, again, to come back to that theme, will remain important. I think, at least when I'm thinking in my lifetime, growing up, Middle Eastern oil was the Middle East was seen really as the world's primary source of oil, and largely almost the only. And that was understood by America's leadership as a great vulnerability. That situation has changed, that there is a lot more greater sources of oil that are produced. So not just the Middle East, but the United States produces a great deal, as does Russia, and then a number of other smaller producers around the world. So I think by and large that's a good thing, that there are numerous sources of oil around the world. Then there's also the question, how do you get the oil from where it's produced to export it to markets? There, I don't know how much detail we want to go into it, but one of the areas of my interest is the Caucasus.
Yes.
And the building of first the oil pipeline from Baku in Azerbaijan through Tbilisi, Georgia, to Ceyhan, a Turkish port, was an important contributor both to diversifying the world's sources of oil, and now there's also a gas pipeline which follows a very similar route. So diversifying, good for the world, but also particularly good for those countries, that is particular Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, as well as for the consumers of the oil and gas, which are largely in Europe. I could say a few more about other things in the Middle East, et cetera, but I don't want to take up all the time, so let me
All right.
Well, I'd like to pick up on what was said, because I think it's really important. New technologies that are emerging right now are increasing the need for the energy resources. And I think for the first time, energy field is facing a huge need for innovation. And I don't think that I agree with the professor that oil and gas will not disappear, but there is a huge opportunity to develop the solutions that need oil and gas not to pollute. So it's about filters, it's about the way how this resource is used. However, for the countries, if they want to keep sovereignty, that don't have resources in oil and gas on its own, they will of course be invited to seek new technological solutions, which one of them is renewable energies, in the sense of soil or wind or tides or similar ones, waves. However, there is, as soon as we speak, and that's even more important for transport, for example, as soon as we speak about renewable energy, we need to speak about energy storage. We need to speak about new ways of new types of batteries, dual stream, renewable, and also rechargeable and recyclable batteries, because they are becoming one of the biggest polluters, especially if we take a look at them on the long run. So here is a huge opportunity for innovation in energy field, and I hope that we will continue to invest and evolve. The last 10 years have been very promising. We have to understand, I mean, we've developed the entire concept of renewable energy really in the last 10 years. So a bit more patience in that field. And at the same time, building the global grids in order to be able to compensate different natural conditions like climate change or severe weather conditions or earthquakes or anything similar, to be able to keep the energy grids operational. I would use TCP/IP model, so have a really distributed environment where if one part of the grid goes out, the rest of the grid can function. And that's a huge opportunity also for the global collaboration, multilateralism, which we spoke today about, but it's a really interest focus based on rules of those that have the interest to connect and to be involved in such a grid. So it's a very exhilarating field that is emerging right now. And there are good opportunities for all kinds of players with all kinds of different energy resources.
Crisis times are best for innovation, right? We innovate better when there is a need for innovation, and now when we speak about energy is real. But we also need to think about cooperation, how we can establish frameworks of cooperation that really lead to a more justice distribution of energy, because technology is there. As my favorite science fiction writer William Gibson said, that the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. So what we do about it? We talk about on the northern hemisphere, on the global north, about artificial intelligence, electric cars, huge networks, and in the global south, totally different how they can find the energy resource to plug into the internet at the Starlink. You know, it's already available above in the stars. So it's a huge achievement. So now there's a lot of criticism about COP, for example, whether it is successful, how we can do it globally or regionally or bilaterally. You had a great experience as a transportation field commissioner in establishing routes, corridors in the
but maybe I can offer here, and yes. I would love to then invite Professor to pick it up. What we tend to forget is that, like, transport or energy is a system-based. So you cannot just partially resolve it. You gotta take a systemic view and have a system solutions that fit together. For example, electrification of transport is stumbling on its own strategy because it was so partially addressed without really good planning and dependencies to see when is the right moment to interfere. You need infrastructure, but you cannot afford infrastructure only on a limited geographical scope. You need to have a global infrastructure, basically continental, let's put it this way, meaning Europe, Central Asia, entire Asia. We are one big continent. So the entire network has to be supported in order for people to pick it up. At the same time, you need to have reliable resources that are stable, because cars cannot just stop, right? It needs to have resources there, which means we need energy storage facilities in order, if we want to move towards renewables, in order to balance the shortages possible in the networks, or be so well globally connected that the shortages can be balanced through the global grids. So at the same time, you need then efficient vehicles that will deliver what customers are expecting or customers need. And last but not least, besides network, energy resources and vehicles, you also need an efficient network management system in order to have the overall control over transport, for example. Similar elements apply to energy systems as well. So I think we are yet to wake up to systemic solutions, to really have a big picture in place when we plan for any kind of intervention, and it has to be globally connected, especially if we're talking about transport and energy.
What is the historian's perception, and from a historical perspective, can this work?
Well, it has to work. Maybe be one answer. I mean, my first thoughts on this are, of course, it comes back to the interplay of politics and economics. So on the one hand, I think the best way to develop these systems is through market forces, properly regulated markets, and that it's quite important, proper regulation. But markets are by far the most efficient way to allocate resources, and so as opposed to centralized planning. On the other hand, without political stability, the energy markets will go nowhere. And a great example of that is the Baku, which at the beginning of the 20th century was producing about 50% of the world's oil at the time. And this is a city that experienced an oil boom beginning in the 1870s, and then really at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, really hit its peak. Things were going wonderfully, but then due to political uncertainty, political conflicts, and the oil production plunged at the beginning of the 20th century, never quite recovered. So again, without going into too many of the details, these things are very closely aligned. Politics and economics with energy markets is right at the heart of both of those.
Violeta, Michael, thank you for your contribution, and have a wonderful stay in Budapest. Thank you
Thank you very much for inviting us.